I think the purpose of the lesson was for them to begin their writing, and I think having the learning target in the very beginning and going over what the essential question was, reviewing the vocabulary, was purposeful so that by the time they were ready to start writing, 99% of them knew what they needed to write about. And then that small group that I pulled, usually they're the ones who struggle with writing for one reason or another. So I kind of let them have the first couple of minutes to themselves to get their thoughts together. And then I pulled them and realized that they kind of had very fragmented sentences when it came to contrasting the plants. And I made them practice with me how to use higher level academic vocabulary, so they didn't have just short, choppy sentences. And that was purposeful because two of them, especially right now, are being tested for WIDA. So we want them to move out of the ELL services and start to be monitored. And this is one way to help them with that. Definitely the charts. They were the most effective thing because all of the answers were right there in front of them. And it wasn't explicitly stated, so it wasn't like sentence 1 they had to write, sentence 2 they had to write. It was components of sentence 1 and components of sentence 2, and then they just had to add the flowery language to make it acceptable for the 5th grade standards. And you know, the picture file cards, to just pull those out and have them looking at it without any words. They could definitely tell comparison and contrast details between them. Well, there was a lot of things that I did before this lesson. This particular lesson, it only took me about 10 minutes to set everything up, but creating all of those charts, that did take a lot of intentional planning. We used backwards design and looked at what was the actual science standard, how is it gonna play into their final project, and then what type of background knowledge information are they gonna need in order to complete the final project. So knowing that they have to design a plant that could survive in the Arctic, I knew I needed to have a chart that compared a plant in the Arctic to a plant in a completely different environment. And then I realized that we probably are going to need to review structures and functions of plants in general. So it led me to doing a basic structure and function chart on a potato plant first before we even did this comparative chart, so that they had the language to pick out the structures and functions of the strangler fig and the Arctic poppy, and then all I had to work on was building the background of the adaptations. So all that planning took me about 4 days of my Christmas break, but it's well worth it because I'm noticing that their academic language, their use of the academic language is more frequent. So they're not giving me simple sentences anymore. They're attempting to use complete sentences, but even when they do give me fragmented things, at least there's a few academic words in there that they weren't using before. So the routines were established kind of from the very beginning of school, but then they've kind of been added onto since we're already in January of this school year. The expectations have gone up. The role of the scouts was crucial because it made those 2 students accountable for watching for behavior, and it allowed them to kind of pick out good behavior rather than just always harping on the bad. And it kind of gives kids some validation that, you know, my peers think that I'm doing well, so I must be doing well because I'm doing well from the teacher, you know, many, many times, but to hear it from my peers is a lot more validating than just hearing it from me. So using the scouts has been great. I just make sure we go over what it is they're supposed to be looking for, because the first couple weeks we tried it, they weren't very specific with their feedback of why they got good behavior, and they were kind of picking their friends. And but now that they've seen how it works and I've modeled it several times for them, what scouts should be looking for and how they should be giving feedback. They've gotten a lot better. Students were completely engaged, and you can see that because there weren't very many behavior problems. I mean, I had to remind a student not to shout out when he was sitting at his desk maybe twice, but that was pretty much it. The rest of the time, they were focused on what they were working on, and everybody was able to turn in a paragraph with at least a couple of added details. I think I had a few who they're slow typers, so they didn't make it in the 30 minutes, but that's fine. And I had everybody talking, with their partner or in the group setting, and they weren't afraid to share what they said. I feel like we've kind of created this classroom where it's okay to fail as long as we learn from our mistakes and as long as we're trying in the beginning. And I think that's totally changed the culture of how they're learning. They're a lot more ambitious with different projects that I've given to them. So they're kind of like the most advanced class when it comes to using the Chromebooks, just because we took a whole entire week every single day of playing around with them and showing them that doing things on it is not going to break them. Now they're able to use all different kinds of apps. We use a Google Classroom, we use all these things, and I can see it now kind of permeating into the rest of the subjects. So when even my ELLs who were afraid of talking before, now they're just hands shoot up in the air, free to say anything, and their sentences are still choppy, but they're not as afraid anymore. And even that one boy who didn't want to read his paper in the very beginning, his classmates encouraged him, and they know they're not going to get made fun of afterwards. So I think had the camera not been here, he probably would have just started reading hands down, but I think more than anything you guys made him nervous, so he's a little bit, yeah. Well, I said in my pre-interview that I was really hoping to tie it into current events. Unfortunately, time just kind of got away from us. They were asking great questions, and I was trying to think of answers and trying to help build up their knowledge from things that they had forgotten. So probably tomorrow we'll talk about the current events issue, but I think the relevancy of it is specifically that, how plants play a huge role in our lives. And I think one of the boys did touch on it. He said, oh, these are producers and we get our energy from plants, and probably something we'll talk about tomorrow is what would happen if all the plants in our ecosystem died, and what would that kind of catastrophic event look like, and how do you think we would function without these things? So I noticed they're remembering things from last year, and I think if they're remembering things from last year, then obviously this topic is very relevant to them. So in the future, I'm hoping that especially tomorrow we can talk about the current events issue with the plants and the seeds, possibly pose some hypotheticals. The final project they're going to have to do is design a plant that can live in an Arctic environment, and how will it function, what will it need to adapt, or possibly taking a plant that we have now and changing it so that it can adapt into the Arctic. That will show them how scientists are using, even though it's a hot button issue, how scientists are using the genetic modifications to make plants more conducive to living in different environments so that they can yield more crops, yield more whatever you need. And hopefully that'll help play into their final assessment of writing an essay on how plants have adapted and how their only real needs are air and water, and anything else can kind of be modified for them. So what we've wrote today will probably be a paragraph in their essay.